Well, one thing we have to all agree on is the government is absolutely professionals at control. If they're not controlling our medical decisions, they're wanting to control our food, Randy.
Well, the last time we had this guest on, we talked about the RFID tagging of the beef and the control of that part of our food chain. But now we've got a situation, probably all small farmers realize that they're competing against a dominating corporate slaughtering industry. So our guest today, Darren,
is Harriet Hageman from the great state of Wyoming. She is a congresswoman. She is an awesome rock star fighting for American freedoms. She grew up on a cattle ranch in Wyoming, I believe. And she was one of the few politicians, Randy, that I think really gets it and has the people's best interest in mind. So, Harriet, thanks so much for joining us again as a guest on here at Patriots with the Grit. We appreciate everything you're doing. Talk to us about the Prime Act, if you would.
Well, thank you for having me again. I thought we had a great conversation last time, and we were able to expose some of what goes on with the USDA, and as you say, the effort to control so many aspects of our lives. The Prime Act was actually introduced by Congressman Massey from Kentucky, and I am a co-sponsor. But what it does is it tries to loosen that grip of corporate, the corporate meatpacking plant just a little bit. And you know, what I've seen, especially growing up on a ranch in Wyoming, we've really concentrated our food supply down into a few packers. So there are only 4 main packers in the United States, one owned by a U.S. company, one owned by a Chinese company, and 2 owned by Brazilian companies. And as you've indicated, I mean, this can have issues associated with supply chain and all kinds of stuff. What the Prime Act is intended to do is to try to get the federal inspection out of and off the hands and off the backs of our smaller producers and some of the folks who can and do have the smaller operations for slaughter, for processing meat. It would still require inspection by state inspectors, but we would not have to pay the exorbitant prices associated with federal inspection and go through all of the various mandates that they have. So what this would really do is ensure that the meat is inspected, that it is safe, but it would allow these smaller processing facilities to have state inspectors rather than being required to have federal inspectors.
So here's my narrow knowledge of the whole system. When I was checking into this, you know, the first thing I thought of is we talk about the 3 or 4 major slaughterhouses, and we know that I guess then farmers have to take it to one of those, which creates, I guess it would be intrastate travel, interstate travel. So my question is, I know of tons of slaughterhouses right around Kansas City, but they're small mom and pops. But is that what you're referring, or what is referred to as the custom slaughter?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm referring to. The people that might process 10, 15, 20 a week, maybe even a little bit more than that. But what you're describing is really the way that they have sought to vertically integrate the entire livestock cattle market all the way through slaughter and bringing the food to the table. Walmart is probably the very best example of a full vertical integration where they own their own ranches and then they process all the way through to selling the meat within their stores, whether it's Walmart or Sam's Club. And that's obviously an enormous corporation. That is an enormous conglomerate. That's an enormous operation. Whereas these smaller custom facilities are the ones that you'll find in Wyoming or around Kansas City, or maybe, you know, in Utah somewhere, where we don't have the big packing facilities, but we want to be able to process 10, 20, 30 at a time, 30 head, you know, a week, something like that. But they all have the same regulations that they have to follow, whether you're processing thousands a day or 30 a week, because of the way that the USDA, their meat inspection process and the rules and regulations that they have in place. What the Prime Act does is free the smaller facilities from having to comply with all those federal regulations, but still have to meet the standards at the state level, which is perfectly, totally adequate. In fact, we did a request to the USDA and asked whether they had any reports of foodborne illnesses from any one of these custom slaughterhouses. We asked for any and all documents demonstrating demonstrating that there had been any kind of an issue. And they wrote back and said they don't have any such documents, meaning that they have never had to go in and deal with a foodborne illness that was endemic to a particular small or custom facility.
Well, it seems to me like around here where we are, and the movement that we're involved with, and the people that we're involved with in our community, just in the last 3 or 4, Harriet, it seems like in the last 3 or 4 years they've gotten really to where they want to support the local farmers. They don't want to go to the local store, the Walmart, Sam's Club, Costco, and purchase their meat. They just rather go to Farmer Jones down the road and say, hey, I want a half a beef, or I want a hog, or I want 20 chickens. And from what I know, Randy, I have never had anybody even bring up the situation or the issue of safety. And I know we've been buying locally processed beef for a while. We've never had any issues. So if they would just kind of stay out of our way, it'd be a lot better for all of us.
Well, it would be better for everyone. And there's a couple of other reasons why. And this is actually related to the EID mandate. Because what the EID mandate says is you cannot move your cattle across state lines unless you have an RFID ear tag. So if you are someone that maybe you run 50 head of cattle and you do custom meat processing for people, you wouldn't have to, and you never have to cross the state line with any of that livestock. You wouldn't have to have an EID. Whereas right now, because of the rules and regulations, it really is a huge barrier for people being able to get into this industry. And I remember growing up, we had the local meat facility that would come, or the processing facility that would come out whenever we butchered. We might butcher 2 or 3 at a time, and we would use it. I come from a very big family, so we'd go through a couple a year, but we could also process for other people. But what the USDA has tried for years to substantially crack down on the ability to buy from your local producer and buy from the rancher next door, or even from being able to construct a small modular type of slaughter facility, so that, again, people can go into that business, do the custom meat processing, and process 10, 15, 20, 30 a week, maybe 10 a day, whatever it might be, but nothing compared to the big guys. But the USDA, what you find out when you get into these big industries, when you get into these industries that have the big players, like our big meat packing plants, or your whatever it might be, they're always going to try to block and put up barriers for people to go into competition for them. So when you think about it, you think about the Chevrons of the world, or you think about the Smithfields in terms of the issues that we're talking about. You think, well, gosh, they would be opposed to these regulations as well. They're fighting this stuff too. That's really not the case. They don't fight against the regulations because they have, as many compliance officers and attorneys as they need to comply with all these regulations. And what it does is it imposes such extreme barriers against people coming in and being able to compete against them. So I refer to this as a form of agency capture, where the USDA really has become an agency that's primarily focused on big ag. And that's what you see. And that's the criticism that I've had of Vilsack. It's the criticism I've had of some of his predecessors. They're way too tied in with big ag, and they really adopt rules and policies and regulations that are designed to kind of squelch the little guy. And I would argue that the EID, RFID mandate, that ear tag mandate, that is actually intended to vertically integrate the industry. They know it's going to be cost prohibitive for the smaller producer. In fact, Michigan, they have an EID mandate, and their rate of losing the small producers, 500 animals and less, is about double the national average because people can't afford to comply. So this is just another example of we've got big ag controlling our food supply chain. That needs to change, and we need to be protecting our smaller producers, and this is one of the ways in which we can do that.
See, that's another point where big government is reducing small business.
Well, I got to jump in here. Harriet, you were born and raised on a cattle ranch. I was born and raised on a grain farm here in Missouri, Northwest Missouri. We raised corn and soybeans. And I remember, I'm 4th generation. My girls are 5th generation, and hopefully soon to be Randy, 6th generation. We'll wait and see. But I remember growing up on the farm, and after harvest, my family was very entrepreneurial. They started out with just a few acres, 3 or 4 acres back in the early 1900s, and now it's a substantial operation. But in the winter, we would do and raise certified seed beans, where we had our own cleaning operation. We would bring in seed. We would clean our own seed. We would bag our own seed. I would take the sewing machine and sew the bags up and stack 50 on a pallet, and we would do anywhere from 12 to 1,500 bushel a day. And then when spring rolls around, we would sell those certified seed beans to other farmers to plant. And then as time goes on, that was very lucrative for us. I mean, that was a big moneymaker for our family, is raising certified seed. It was just another way to generate income with commodity prices the way they were. And then all of a sudden, I was away from the farm for many years. I started my own company and ran it for a long time. And I started kind of getting back in the farm. And I watched a movie, Food Inc., I believe was the name of it. And they talked about how Monsanto had moved their way in and had started doing all these underhanded, nefarious things to where local farmers could no longer produce their own seed. Local ranchers could no longer produce their own meat like they wanted to or they used to. And I'm like, wow, I didn't know the government had this much of a stranglehold on American agriculture. But that's just one thing dating back, 30, 40 years that we were making our own way. We were making great money, but then government steps in and squashes that. And I just think that's totally wrong the way it's being done.
I agree with you, and that's what regulations have done.
Right.
And so when you look at the expansion of regulations, it really started under Roosevelt with the New Deal. We all understand that the very first Federal Register was published at that time, and the Federal Register is where these regulations are published. But then where it really exploded was under Bill Clinton. And if you go back and what happened in 1994 when the Republicans took the House for the first time in decades, then Bill Clinton recognized that his policies and his agenda, he was not going to be able to get it through. And the Republican at that time, and being led by Newt Gingrich, was very effective at blocking his agenda. So what he did is he turned to regulations. And one of the largest regulations ever passed in U.S. history was done under Bill Clinton. It was called the Roadless Rule. And it was within the Forest Service, and it was designed to deny access, management, and use to 58.5 million acres of National Forest Service lands out of a total of 192. So, it was almost a full third of all of our National Forest Service lands, with just the stroke of a pen. The President of the United States took an action that prior to that, nobody in their wildest dreams ever thought an agency would have the authority to do it. I fought that. I was able to get a nationwide injunction against it. But in terms of the way that the Forest Service acted, is that I think what that did is that was a lesson for the government and for these agencies to decide that at that point, really the sky's the limit. And that's what happened here, is the sky was the limit. And they were able to do whatever massive regulations that they wanted to do. And so it's really been the last 30 years that you've seen this incredible overreach and this effort to legislate through regulations. But one of the things that's done is that's really consolidated many, many, many industries, including the food industries. And by that, I mean the broad spectrum of the food industries, whether you're in the cattle industry. Really, if you look at pork and poultry as being two examples, both of those have been entirely vertically integrated. You have very few independent pork and poultry producers anymore. Those are controlled by the big processing facilities, the big packers. They own all the way from the eggs all the way up to and the piglets all the way up through processing. And they're trying to do that with the cattle industry as well.
So it kind of registered with me. You've got the IED situation. Now you have this. Could this actually, based on what you said, it sounds like this could counteract what they're trying to do with the EID.
It could for our much smaller operators.
Right. The ones that can't afford it.
Right, and some of the bigger ranchers, especially when you come from a state like Wyoming, because we don't have big packers in Wyoming. So for our cattle, and this is one of the reasons the RFID rule is so bad and so discriminatory. If you come from Kansas, Texas, Iowa, Ohio, you come from those big states where they have the packing facilities. The irony is they're not subject to the RFID rule, because the cattle that are produced and raised in those states typically will never have to cross the state line at any time. Whereas if you're a rancher in Wyoming, your livestock are going to most likely have to cross that state line at some point in their life cycle, because of the way that we operate. We have colder winters, so we don't do as much in terms of the feedlots. We have some, but we're not like a Nebraska.
Right.
And then we don't have the big packers. So, but if you've got 50, 75 head, or you're a small processor, and you can work with some of even the bigger ranchers, and maybe they pick out 20 head a year that they have custom processed, and then they sell that meat at a premium to a local restaurant. I mean, how many times do you see on a higher end restaurant, they actually will identify in the back of the menu who their suppliers are. And it might be ABC Farms that's just 20 miles away.
Right.
That is a marketing shtick. That is our food is locally produced. It's locally raised. It's safer. It doesn't have to travel 1,000 miles to get to you. It isn't being frozen. It isn't all those things. So there is a very important niche market here for restaurants, for your specialty grocery stores, for farmers markets, for all different kinds of things where people want to know where their meat comes from and they want that custom processing. Again, because of the USDA rules and regulations that are generally designed to deal with facilities that do thousands upon thousands of animals a day, it doesn't really apply to the small guy, except it does apply to the small guy. And that's what we're trying to get the exemption for. So the Prime Act would apply to a subset so that we can have those custom operations, the custom processing.
Well, do you think this will create more smaller processors?
I do.
It'll open up more businesses?
One of the biggest barriers that you have is the USDA inspection requirements. That's one of the biggest barriers to being able to play in this field. And they can be incredibly dictatorial and tyrannical. It's a terribly expensive process, and you never know what they may do to your operation. I know of horror stories that I'm not going to bore you with at this time. It really isn't important, but where the USDA guy wasn't doing his job, he was starting to get written up because he hadn't really been showing up for work and doing his job. So his reaction was to go in and start basically just destroying these smaller operations. Wow. Because it made it appear that he was doing his job, writing up for things that never happened. But then you've got a lawsuit on your hands trying to demonstrate that what the inspector said happened didn't happen, claiming that they found a mouse somewhere when that never occurred, doing those kinds of things. So, there's human error, there's human foibles that are associated with this. But the fact is, we have state inspectors, and they know as well as any federal inspector what they need to be looking for and what is a safe operation. We just need to make it so that we have the access to these kinds of resources. We shouldn't have the federal government standing in the way of either custom operations or even a small mom and pop facility. We ought to be encouraging entrepreneurship. We ought to be encouraging more people to be producing and processing healthy food. I mean, what a lot of people don't get is the cow is one of the most efficient forms of food production that there is.
But they're killing the environment.
It is very good for the environment. The grazing. What it does in terms of soil management, what they do in terms of controlling noxious weeds, what they do in terms of being incredibly inefficient at producing the highest form of protein that we can consume, what that does for us health-wise, what eating beef, how eating beef is good for all of us. I know for years, again, USDA and folks like that, the health services, FDA, they've tried to indicate otherwise, but consuming beef is one of the very best things that you can do health-wise. It's good for your heart. It's good for managing diabetes. And then you look at all of the byproducts of the of cows from the what you can do with the bones and the tallow and the glue and all of the different things. I mean, it's just an incredibly efficient animal for food production and production of other goods that we need. And we need to be encouraging that. We shouldn't have federal agencies that are blocking it.
Well, I've been hearing a lot in the last few months about the carnivore diet, Randy, and this kind of has me jazzed up to do the carnivore. What about you?
Hey, if I could live on meat, that's all I'd eat.
I mean, this is I love it. But for those people that are listening, the Prime Act, the acronym stands for Processing Revival and Interstate Meat Exemption Act. And so I want to know here, how much influence do the big 3 or 4 packers have on the USDA? I mean, do they kind of have a stranglehold on these inspectors at the USDA? Are they kind of pulling the strings there, or is it kind of a nefarious activity going on in between them, and a lot of money changing hands, or what do you see going on there?
As far as the relationship with the inspectors themselves, I don't believe that I have the expertise to comment specifically on that. What I do know is that your big packers have, as I said, a whole slew of attorneys and compliance officers and their own inspectors to ensure that they're always going to be in compliance with these. And again, imposing barriers against entry into the market is what big corporations do. It's not just the packers. You can look at a lot of different industries. I think one of the worst ones is the tech industry. Microsoft is notorious for buying anything that could potentially be competition. And that's one of the ways that Bill Gates has made an awful lot of money, is by buying up and preventing the entry into the marketplace of anybody who could compete with him. This is something that's kind of similar to that. I wouldn't refer to it or focus specifically on the relationship with the inspectors. Where the relationship is very important is with the USDA. And that's one of the reasons I'm very, very, very excited about Donald Trump's pick to run the USDA. I do not see, in looking at her background and her history and her knowledge and what she's done, she's an incredibly impressive woman, an incredibly impressive person. But I don't see her being a captive of big ag. And I couldn't say that about Vilsack. I'll name names. I don't have a problem doing that. I think Vilsack has very much been in the pocket of big ag for a long, long time. I think he was when he was there before, and I think that he has been through this administration as well. So again, it's a form of agency capture, and it is the adoption of the regulations and putting up the barriers to make it more difficult to get into the market or the industry.
So here, I kind of put together some thoughts about the benefits. We already talked about small business, but if you're a farmer and you're putting these through a sale barn, and now they're stressed out in the sale barn, then you put them on a truck and you ship them out to another state. I mean, I've always wondered about the stress on the cattle, but I thought it was funny when somebody said you stress out that you are what you eat. So you have a cow that's stressed out, the meat changes flavor.
So hopefully by the time that they get to wherever they're going, whether it might be to Nebraska for us or Missouri or Michigan, wherever it might be, that they're going to be fed out to the next level. Because my family's ranch are cow-calf operations. So once they wean the calves, then they will go on and maybe be put on pasture for another 6 or 8 months. And then they'll go into a feedlot, be fattened up to be choice prime, whatever it might be. And then they go to the slaughterhouse. And so hopefully there's the time that they're going to be able to regain their footing, if you will. But one of the challenges that we do have is we don't have a lot of sale barns anymore. It's difficult to even market your cattle just because of the changes in the industry. In Wyoming, we've got one up in Buffalo. We've got an excellent one in Torrington that kind of serves all of eastern Wyoming and even western Nebraska. They've been around for a long, long time. I've known those folks for years. But because of the barriers and the challenges in the ag industry, we're losing some of those support services, if you will, large animal vets. The majority of people that are graduating from our vet schools, getting into and graduating from our vet schools, are small animal vets. So we're not getting as many veterinarians that can treat cattle and horses, and so that becomes a challenge, and the cost goes up. But again, every time that the government steps in and imposes additional regulations or additional restrictions or additional paperwork requirements or additional, mandates about pharmaceuticals and being able to use those in the ag industry, you're going to see more and more farms and ranches go by the wayside because they just simply cannot. They can't keep up, number one. And number two, we're an aging industry. We know that. We need more young people coming into the ag industry. But when you've, again, got a federal government that's there with their notepad and their clipboard, monitoring everything that you're doing, whether it's through an EID ear tag or it is limiting your access to the interstate market, it becomes easier to go into a different line of business.
Well, and I was thinking, would this process drive the cost of meat down? Because it seems like to me there's less movement. It's less people touching it. So would the end consumer, would the prices be cheaper that way?
Well, I think what it does is it allows people to negotiate the prices that they're willing to pay and they're willing to take. And that's what you don't have right now. I don't get to go to Walmart and say, you've got $12.59 a pound for this New York strip. I'm willing to give you 10. They're able to do is, hey, I'll sell you a side of beef. Can you come over and finish the roof on my barn? I mean, that's the kind of thing that it does. It allows for more community engagement that I think we've historically had with food production and our food producers, where we do that kind of bartering and trading. And I think that strengthens your communities and the way that people interact with each other. Whether it brings the prices down, it may. And I think that gives you more of an opportunity to negotiate.
Well, in the last really observation I have, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong, I know I get my meat from a little store here in town. He goes out, when I wanted to have beef, he went out and found somebody like through the Amish community that had a cow that was non-antibiotic, grass-fed. The taste is fantastic compared to me going up here to the grocery store. And the meat even looks different. The meat in the store is all flushed out looking. What is the difference?
Well, I think a couple of things. One is you're talking about grass-fed, which is different than when we finish out cattle with either corn or another type of high energy food. It's just a different way that we're going to be producing. We're going to be number one producing livestock and then producing the meat. Okay. So, like I said, I'm not opposed to packers. Packers are not our enemy. I have disagreements with them sometimes. There's no question about it. But they're not our enemy, and they serve a very, very good service. And the grocery stores. I mean, we are. I hate to say this word because I don't think that it really is applicable. Maybe I shouldn't even use that word. I was going to say we're spoiled. I don't think we're spoiled. We work hard. We have the freedoms and liberties that we do in this country because of what we've created, our Constitution and our foundation of laws that we have. So being able to go into a grocery store and pick up a New York strip, or my favorite, a ribeye, or a pork chop, or a pound of sausage, whatever it is. That's
She's
just
talking
Americana.
my language.
That's Americana. That's who and what we are. And everybody's gonna. There's a different market for everybody. What I'm trying to prevent is the USDA picking winners and losers and defining for us what the market should be. Right. You have the right to go and you're probably paying a premium for the grass-fed cow. That's fine. More power to you. More power to the seller. I'm perfectly happy with that. What I don't want is the USDA stepping in the middle of that relationship and telling you can't buy it and telling them that they can't sell it. That's not our role as government officials. Our role is to serve you.
Well, Harriet, you mentioned earlier Walmart being one of the largest vertically integrated operations out there, from owning the ranch all the way down to selling it in their store. What other companies, is Costco doing anything similar to that, or any of the large grocery stores, or is it just primarily Walmart?
Now, what was that you said?
I said, you mentioned earlier in the show, Walmart was one of the largest vertically integrated companies, owning the ranch all the way down to selling the meat in their stores. My question to you is, are any other companies doing that? Costco or any of the large grocery companies doing that, or is it just Walmart?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know. I just know that Walmart has done it, but I don't know whether Costco has also gone down that line. From the standpoint of Walmart, it makes sense.
It makes total sense. From a business standpoint, it makes all the sense in the world.
Yep, sure does.
I mean,
I'm perfectly comfortable with Walmart being able to make that choice. But that's really the key word right there. And I can understand when you're selling to literally millions of people, the USDA has an inspection process in place for that. Okay, cool. But we have also, I guess, that kind of a food freedom movement, but also allow me the other choice of not having to buy from Walmart, being able to buy from the small producer, being able to buy directly from the producer, taking that cow in the back of my pickup with a stock rack and taking it over to a small processor and right there having them do it myself. Those are the kinds of options and choices that we should have. And that's just what we're trying to do with this act, as well as other legislation. I'm just trying to get government out of the way of dictating what people can do.
So is there any lobby opposing this?
I don't know if I can answer that question right now.
Okay.
I think that there most likely will be. And what you're going to hear is, oh my gosh, food safety, food safety, food safety. Again, This isn't a food safety issue. This isn't where you've got the problems. It's not in the small mom and pop places that you've got the problems.
All right.
And in addition to which, we will have the state inspection. It's just that we don't have to pay the astronomical amount of money for the federal inspection, and we don't have to meet all of the federal regulations. But there will still be the inspections that are done on the state level. And I'm going to give a shout out to the folks in Wyoming. I think that we have our agencies in the state of Wyoming, whether it's the Department of Environmental Quality, or it is the Game and Fish Department, or it is the Health Department, these are professionals who are very good at their job and do what they need to do to carry out their statutory and regulatory obligations. So I don't have any fear at all or any concern whatsoever that our states are going to be able to fully meet this demand and step up to the plate. And in many ways, I think they're going to be better because there's more accountability the closer you are to the closer the government is to the people.
Well, while we're on that topic, Harriet, tell me real quick, what's the relationship between the state inspectors and the USDA? Is there some animosity there? Is there a kind of a competition going back and forth between state and federal? Does state feel like they're subservient to the federal regulator? What's the whole relationship like with that?
I don't know that I can speak about personal relationships. This is more, I would say, about human nature. And that is what I have seen with the work that I've done over the years in the regulatory or administrative space, is that any agency that can expand its authority through regulations, through sucking in more of a regulated community, whatever it may be, they're going to do that because it gives them more power and it gives them more money. So again, I think that this is as much human nature as anything else. And I think that when you look at the USDA, I think we've also kind of moved into this idea of a nanny state, not an idea of a nanny state. You have federal regulators that truly believe they ought to, come into your house every day and spoon feed you green beans because that's going to be better for you. But also that creates jobs, because then they're going to need a lot of people who give people green beans every morning. So that's what this does. This is about the expansion of government or the contraction of government. And that's where I say that it's as much human nature as anything else. I think if I sat right here with a federal inspector and said, are your state inspectors as good? I think they'd probably be honest and say, yeah, I think they're fine. But I don't want to lose my job.
Right.
So that's really what this is about, is it's economic, it's human nature, and it's an effort by these federal agencies to take on roles and responsibilities that they never should have taken on in the first place, and under our form of government and our Constitution never should have been put in their laps.
Well, another thing that is my biggest fear, Randy, is knowing what we've seen in the last 4 years is there's probably a lot of Americans out there that are totally okay with people coming in and spoon-feeding them green beans every morning from the federal level. So I think we have to educate the American people, too, that, hey, the federal government and their oversight's not always as good as it's cracked up to be.
No.
So, Harriet, thanks so much for coming on. Hey, real quick, tell our viewers and our audience if there are any places they can follow you or keep up with what you're doing, and also give us one good piece of actionable parting advice today.
Hageman.house.gov, and you can follow me on Twitter and various places at Harriet Hageman. The piece of advice is this: we have to be trusting our fellow men and women to do the right things in carrying out their jobs. And I think that one of the things that's happened, especially over the last 30 years, is our government has convinced us that the only people who are going to save us from ourselves or our neighbor or whatever it might be is the federal government. And that's really a terrible way of looking at things, because that isn't the way that this is going to work or does work. The federal government should not be as embedded in our lives as it has become. And it has become that because we have allowed these regulatory agencies to expand well beyond their authorization, well beyond what they were intended to be. But what that's done is that stockpiled massive amounts of power back here in Washington, D.C., and nobody wants to give up that power. We as citizens, we as representatives, our battle over the next 10 years is trying to divest as much as we can from Washington, D.C. and bring that power back to the states. This is one of the steps in that, and I think it's an important one because it relates to our food supply, food security, safety of our food, small businesses, our mom and pop shops, being able to protect our ranchers and farmers. all of those things kind of wrapped up in one bill that a lot of people may think it's not all that important. It's very important because what it is it's a recognition that our food supply and the choices we have should be made by us and not by the federal government.
Amen to that.
And my final follow-up is I just want to make sure everybody knows, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this isn't just beef. We talked a lot about beef, but it's pork, and would it be poultry also?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that.
So, yeah, I probably should have clarified that. I guess you can see I came from a cattle ranch, but
yeah,
it's just you know what? It's just good government.
Yeah. Well, we really appreciate it again. You always bring you're the meat specialist, I guess.
These are some topics that I think are a little bit different than what our normal shows are about, but it's something that the American people need to really know is going on out there. Because, Randy, up until a few weeks ago, I'd never heard of the Prime Act.
Oh, no.
The only thing I was familiar with is prime rib, and
right.
So I just want to say thank you, Harriet, for coming on here and educating our audience and doing what you're doing up there in Washington, D.C.
Well, thank you. You know, I went to college on a livestock judging scholarship in 1981.
Didn't know they had such a thing. A
A
livestock judging scholarship.
Yep, I went on a livestock judging scholarship to Casper College, a little community college in Wyoming in 1981. And here I am talking, and I was not a meat judge. My brother Hugh did the meat judging. I did not meat judge, but I did a lot of butchering growing up. So I've got some area of knowledge in this, and it's been fun being on with you two gentlemen today.
Well, noting all the scholarships that are given away today for crazy, nonsensical
gender studies,
all that, I commend you for being on a livestock judging scholarship. So thank you so much for doing what you're doing, and just keep up the fight for us here in America and keeping America great.
Thank you very much.
All right, Harriet, take care. See you later. Bye.